afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Sabina Ijaz. Welcome to Setting the Foundation for Good Relations in Our Homeland, a webinar by Indigenous Knowledge Keepers addressing racism in healthcare. My colleague, Associate Deputy Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, Valerie Gideon, and I are very happy to welcome you here today on behalf of the Knowledge Keepers at Turtle Lodge, Central House of Knowledge. I know we are both very honored to have been invited by the Knowledge Keepers at the Turtle Lodge to be the moderators of this significant, historic, and important session today, where we hear directly from the Indigenous leaders and knowledge holders who have traditionally offered guidance and direction within Indigenous families, communities, and nations for tens of thousands of years. Invited by the Government of Canada, the Knowledge Keepers come forward today as free and independent thinkers to share their knowledge and guidance that can help glue this country back together, as together we are challenged by issues such as racism, climate change, violence, mental illness, and addiction. Having sat in ceremony for many years, I know that is the place where everything begins from, as we humble ourselves to the higher power of spirit that directs our lives. Ceremony, when conducted in the sacred lodges with the sacred bundles, is an experience like no other, that can only be felt and experienced to be understood as the spirit touches and lifts the heart. Today, we humbly ask Grandmother Katherine Whitecloud of the Dakota Nation to lead us with an opening prayer.
It's my honor and my humble privilege to share with you the prayer that I offered this morning, rather than to offer a prayer here. As we begin each day in prayer, and as we begin each day asking for the guidance from our grandfather, our creator, and our ancestors. So I would like to share with you what I prayed for this morning. I offered up our tobacco, our water, our wasna, our wamnaiza, and our fruit, our berries, to our creator and to our ancestors who have gone on before us. I humbly ask that there be understanding as we engage in this conversation today. Understanding so that the perpetuation of subjugation does not continue and will not impact our children and our grandchildren. I ask for hearts and minds to be opened, to understand we are all one in the eyes of our Creator, that we all are here to fulfill our responsibilities for which we are blessed with the gift of life and placed here on earth. Our ancestors have guided us forever. Their presence is palpable, their direction is clear, and our direction is to speak the truth. I gave thanks for the gift of life today, for the gift of our children and our grandchildren, and for all that has been provided to us to live a good life, to be healthy, and to do the will of our Creator. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tumi, Grandmother Katherine Whitecloud. As we move into a new year with new beginnings, this is a perfect time to hear the voice of the Indigenous Knowledge Keepers. As those who have traditionally offered guidance in Indigenous nations, the Knowledge Keepers always bring a message of love, hope, and unity for all in the country. Before we begin to introduce the Knowledge Keepers, I would like to introduce my colleague and co-moderator of this session, Dr. Valerie Gideon. Dr. Gideon is a member of the Mi'kmaq Nation, as well as being the Associate Deputy Minister of Indigenous Services Canada. Dr. Gideon and I have seen a lot of each other this past year as we are on weekly meetings with Minister Carolyn Bennett and a national group of Indigenous physicians and physicians working in Indigenous communities and nations. We've been meeting to talk about and advocate for some of the issues being faced on the ground in Indigenous nations, critical health issues including COVID-19, racism, symptoms of colonization, and lack of access to basic needs of survival. We've been advocating for the autonomy and self-determination of Indigenous nations, and a lot of our discussions have related to the need to lift up the Indigenous Knowledge Keepers, who many of us believe can help lead and guide this country back to wellness. Dr. Valerie Gideon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by just acknowledging that I'm on the traditional unceded Algonquin territory on quite a beautiful afternoon. I'd like to thank Grandmother Whitecloud for her opening prayer, and I want to thank Turtle Lodge and the Knowledge Keepers for the invitation to co-moderate this session this afternoon. It's truly an honor and a privilege for me to do so. As noted by Sabina, I am a member of the Mi'kmaq Nation and I'm at Indigenous Services Canada. I'm also the mother of two beautiful First Nation girls. And I have the privilege of working with Indigenous health professionals, Indigenous advocates, community members, leaders from across the country. I've had many travels to beautiful communities across Turtle Island, and I have really learned a great deal from elders and knowledge keepers throughout my career, including the wisdom of Grandmother Whitecloud at one point as well at the Assembly of First Nations. So today is very important for me, and I'm sure for many people that are participating in this webinar, because it brings us at the forefront of a very important conversation, and one that needs to guide us, as Sabina has mentioned, as we embark on a number of very significant initiatives in the coming year or years, including the implementation of legislation on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, including the co-development of distinctions-based Indigenous health legislation, as well as the work that is underway now around anti-Indigenous racism across the Canadian healthcare system, and preventing and eliminating that racism for future generations, as well as the current generation. I would like to acknowledge Joyce's principle as well, which has been shared by the Atikamekw Nation in memory of Joyce Echaquan, who very tragically passed away as a result of instances of systemic racism in the Canadian healthcare system. And so we remember her and her legacy today, and will continue to find ways in which we can honor that legacy in the months and years to come. So with that introduction, I will turn it back over to my colleague, but just prior to doing so, I would like to just confirm a few logistics. Alors, si vous êtes francophone et vous désirez entendre la session en français, vous avez le bouton au bas de votre écran qui vous permet d'utiliser ou sélectionner la langue francophone pour la session d'aujourd'hui. The webinar will be recorded, will be made available by Turtle Lodge, as noted earlier. And the agenda today is really intended for our knowledge keepers, or for knowledge keepers today, to be able to speak to their experience and share their teachings. We will have a question and answer period as well, and we will be moderating that through the chat function in the Zoom link. So Sabina and myself will be taking turns in terms of sharing questions that have been identified through the chat, and we will be inviting knowledge keepers to be able to provide further wisdom to us in terms of answering those, I'm sure will be very meaningful questions. Sabina, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Valerie Gideon. We have some esteemed knowledge keepers with us today, representing a number of Indigenous nations across Turtle Island. Each of the knowledge keepers who will share today is a respected member of the National Turtle Lodge Council of Knowledge Keepers. The knowledge keepers are the true leaders, the elders, and the professors of Indigenous nations and peoples who have spent a lifetime learning and earning the knowledge they carry about their ancestral way of life. Fluent in their original languages, they have learned their teachings from ceremony and from the elders and knowledge keepers of their nations. The knowledge keepers are very kind people who have dedicated their lives to restoring the values and way of life of their ancestors by mentoring the youth and offering guidance to the people. Traditionally, it was the knowledge keepers of Indigenous nations who offered leadership and guidance, following the ceremonial protocols of their people. For the knowledge keepers, it has never been their way as a people to impose, rather to offer guidance, vision, and a spiritual leadership in the spirit of sharing. They wish to come forward to share their knowledge and strengths that are embedded in their identity as the original peoples of their homeland. For us today, in keeping with Indigenous protocols, free choice is paramount. While the role of the knowledge keepers is to share the spiritual and natural laws that apply universally to each and every one of us, it is always the free choice of the individual to follow the guidance that is provided.